History is full of battles fought with bullets and bombs, but some wars were won with nothing more than a whisper, a forged document, or a single well-timed lie. During World War II, while Hitler's armies stormed across Europe and his U-boats prowled the Atlantic, a quiet war was being fought in the shadows, a war of deception, illusion, and betrayal. And at the heart of it was a network so secret, so brilliantly disguised, that even the Nazis, masters of propaganda and counterintelligence, believed their own lies. This is the untold story of the spy network that fooled Hitler's empire for years, and, in doing so, helped turn the tide of the war. London, 1941. The rain had been falling since dawn, washing the soot and smoke from the streets. In a small office, hidden behind a nondescript building in Westminster, a man named Thomas Armitage stared at a map of Europe pinned to the wall. Every pin on that map, red, blue, and white, represented a life. Some were agents deep in enemy territory. Others were traitors who had already been caught. Armitage was a quiet man, the kind who spoke rarely but noticed everything. He was one of Britain's senior intelligence handlers in a division so secret it didn't officially exist, MI5's double-cross section. Their mission was both simple and impossible. Turn captured Nazi spies into double agents, feed them just enough truth to keep the Gestapo convinced, and then layer it all with carefully crafted lies that would send Hitler's military machine chasing ghosts. By 1941, Britain was desperate. The Blitz had ravaged London, France had fallen, and Hitler was preparing for an invasion of the Soviet Union. If Germany knew what the Allies were really planning, the war could end in disaster. But if Armitage's network succeeded, if his agents could make the Nazis believe in fake armies, fake plans, fake invasions, then perhaps the Allies could fight back not with tanks, but with illusion.
The first catch. It began with a man who called himself Agent Snow. In truth, his real name was Arthur Owens, a Welshman with a taste for danger and a strange admiration for both sides of the war. In 1938, long before the bombs fell, Owens had begun passing minor intelligence to the Germans. He fancied himself a patriot, playing both ends for profit. But when MI5 discovered his secret, they didn't execute him. They made him an offer instead. "You can keep working for the Germans," Armitage had told him, leaning forward in that small interrogation room. "Only now you'll be working for us too." And so, Agent Snow became Britain's first double agent of the war. Through him, the British learned how German intelligence operated, their codes, their priorities, even their weaknesses. And when Owens sent his first message back to the Abwehr, the German intelligence service, it was laced with just enough truth to be believed. The Germans trusted him completely. What they didn't know was that every word he sent was filtered, shaped, and rewritten by Armitage's team in London. By the time the Nazis realized the trap, it would be far too late. The birth of the network. Agent Snow was just the beginning. Soon, 1 became 5, 5 became 10, and by 1943, the double-cross system controlled nearly every German spy in Britain.
Some of these agents had been captured upon landing. Others surrendered willingly, terrified of British prisons. Each was given a choice: work for us
or vanish. Among them were some of the most unlikely heroes of the war. There was Juan Pujol Garcia, a Spaniard who despised both fascism and communism. He had no formal training, no contacts, and no reason to be trusted. But what he had was imagination. Codenamed Garbo, after the actress Greta Garbo, he would become the most valuable double agent in history. Working with MI5 handler Thomas Harris, Garbo fabricated an entire army of fake spies across Britain: dockworkers, pilots, clerks, even aristocrats. He wrote reports so convincing that German intelligence believed every word. The Germans paid him lavishly. They decorated him. They never realized that every one of his messages went straight through British hands. By 1944, the Abwehr believed Garbo commanded a spy network of 27 operatives across Britain. In truth, not one of them existed. And yet, because of his meticulous reports, written with false but consistent detail, the Nazis used his intelligence to make critical decisions about troop deployments, bombing targets, and even invasion defenses. Garbo's lies were about to change history. Deception by design. As the Allied plans for D-Day began to take shape, British intelligence faced a terrifying problem. If the Germans learned where the invasion would take place, it could all collapse before it began. So Armitage and his team crafted a masterpiece of deception, Operation Fortitude. The plan was simple in concept, but breathtaking in scale. They would convince Hitler that the Allied invasion would strike not at Normandy, but at Pas-de-Calais, the narrowest point between England and France. To do this, they built entire phantom armies: rubber tanks, wooden aircraft, fake radio chatter, counterfeit orders. But the illusion would mean nothing without believable intelligence to back it up.
That's where the double-cross network came in. Garbo and his fellow agents began feeding a steady stream of verified intelligence to the Germans. Fake troop movements, shipping logs, and weather updates, all designed to support the lie. The Nazis bought it completely. Hitler himself believed the main invasion would come at Calais. Even after the D-Day landings began on June 6, 1944, he refused to move his panzer divisions for 2 whole weeks, waiting for an attack that would never come. Those 2 weeks gave the Allies the foothold they needed to liberate France. And the double-cross network, operating from hidden offices in London, had just pulled off the greatest deception in modern warfare. Years in the shadows. What made the double-cross so extraordinary wasn't just its success, it was its longevity. From 1940 to 1945, the network never broke. Not a single agent betrayed them to the Nazis. Even as the Gestapo hunted for leaks, even as Hitler demanded answers, the illusion held. Because the truth was hidden behind a wall of carefully crafted lies, each one consistent, patient, believable. Every false map, every coded message, every whispered rumor, all designed to weave one enormous tapestry of fiction that the Germans accepted as truth. And when the war finally ended, the Abwehr's files told the final irony. They believed the double-cross agents were their most loyal and effective spies.
In their records, they were heroes of the Reich. In reality, they were the reason Germany lost the war. Post-war silence. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the world celebrated victory, but the men and women of the double-cross network did not. Their work had been invisible by design. There were no parades for them, no medals in the open. Thomas Armitage retired quietly, his name erased from official records. Garbo, Juan Pujol, faked his death in 1949 and vanished to South America. Only decades later did historians uncover the full truth, that one of the most decisive victories of the entire war
was not won on a battlefield, but in the minds of those who believed a lie. Epilogue. The story of the double-cross network remains a monument to human cunning, to the strange, quiet courage of those who fight with deception instead of violence. They showed that sometimes the sharpest weapon is not the sword, but the story. And while Hitler's empire collapsed in ruins, his generals still clung to the false intelligence that had led them astray, proof that even the mightiest armies can be defeated by an idea. In the end, the network that fooled the Nazis for years did more than just win battles. It reshaped the very art of war. And somewhere, in the archives of history, among the faded pages of secret reports and intercepted signals, the truth still whispers of the spies who never fired a shot, yet changed the course of the world. The lights of the city had long been dimmed by blackout curtains, and yet beneath the surface of this battered island, another world hummed with invisible life. Beneath the quiet streets and tea rooms, a web of spies, couriers, and analysts worked day and night, weaving deception into the fabric of the war. In a narrow corridor inside 58th St. James Street, a building that appeared to be a private insurance firm, Thomas Armitage and his small team of officers were gathered in a smoke-filled room. A single word hung in the air, like the smell of the damp London fog outside. Fortitude. But fortitude was still years away. The groundwork had to be laid, layer by layer, lie by lie. The goal was not merely to fool the Nazis once, but to trap them in a long, living illusion, one that evolved with the tides of the war. It was, in essence, a performance, a deadly, invisible theater where every role mattered and every word could mean the difference between life and death. The audition for a liar. The first test of this growing network came with a young Polish woman named Krystyna Skarbek, codenamed Christine Granville. Her courage was unmatched, her loyalty unquestionable, but her gift was something else entirely. She could lie with sincerity. In the early days of 1941, she operated in the ruins of occupied France, sending coded reports through hidden radios disguised as church equipment. When the Gestapo nearly caught her in Marseille, she smiled at the officer interrogating her and said, "You don't need to look for spies. You're already talking to one." He laughed. She walked away free. Her intelligence on German troop transfers would later feed into the double-cross system's fabric of truth and fiction. Every report she sent was partly real, partly false, crafted to build trust with the Germans who thought they'd penetrated Allied communications. Armitage understood it better than anyone. The most believable lie is one built on truth. By 1942, the Abwehr, the Nazi intelligence service, believed it had an impressive spy network in Britain. In reality, every single one of its agents had been caught, turned, or replaced. From his office in London, Armitage oversaw the impossible. He had built a symphony of deception, each agent a separate note, each report part of a larger melody designed to lure the enemy deeper into the fog. Agent Garbo was his masterpiece, but there were others, each with their own personality, their own fictional army of informants. There was Tricycle, the smooth-talking Yugoslav playboy Duško Popov, who infiltrated German high command and later inspired Ian Fleming's creation of James Bond. Popov moved through casinos, embassies, and nightclubs, sending coded reports to Berlin while secretly answering to MI5. To the Germans, he was loyal. To the British, he was a weapon of elegance and deceit. In one of his coded messages to Berlin, Popov mentioned Allied troop concentrations in southern England, exactly what the British wanted the Nazis to believe. By the time the Abwehr finished decoding it, the illusion had already taken root. The web expands. 1943 brought a shift. With North Africa liberated and Italy on the brink, the Allies began looking toward France. The question was no longer if they would invade Europe, but where. The Appware, desperate to anticipate the blow, redoubled its espionage efforts in Britain. Dozens of new agents were parachuted across the Channel under cover of darkness. But every one of them was met with the same fate: arrested, turned, or quietly eliminated. Armitage watched the reports pile in with quiet satisfaction. Every captured spy added another strand to his web. By the end of 1943, his double-cross network had grown to include over 20 active double agents, each with their own handler, their own cover story, and their own fictional sub-agents. From a distance, the Appware believed it was commanding a vast intelligence empire inside Britain. In truth, it was reading scripts written entirely in London.
The deceiver's dilemma. But deception carries its own weight. For many agents, the lies began to blur the line between survival and betrayal. Garbo, whose imaginary network spanned across Britain, began to live for the letters he wrote to Berlin. He described non-existent agents with such passion and precision that even his British handlers began to wonder if he believed them to be real. He named them, gave them backstories, families, fears. He mourned one when she was killed in an imaginary bombing. His reports were pages of fiction written with the discipline of truth. And Berlin believed every word. For Armitage, it was both genius and madness. He understood that to deceive so well, one must almost believe the lie oneself. But every lie had consequences, and the deeper they went, the higher the stakes became. Operation Torch. Late 1942. Before the Great Deception of D-Day, there was Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa, and it would serve as the first major test of Armitage's network. Garbo and Tricycle sent messages to Berlin suggesting that the Allies were preparing to strike at Norway or Greece. The reports were convincing, plausible, detailed, timed perfectly. When the Allies landed in Algeria and Morocco in November, the German High Command was caught completely off guard. Hitler raged. How had his spies missed this? He didn't know that his spies had been the ones who told him the lie. Operation Torch was a success, and within the British war rooms the message was clear: deception could win battles. The art of controlled truth. After Torch, the double-cross team became a finely tuned machine. Messages were reviewed not by individuals, but by committees, military, intelligence, and psychological experts. Every phrase was weighed for effect. Even the smallest details mattered: the time a message was sent, the type of paper it was written on, the subtle errors that made it human. Armitage once told his agents, "The Germans will never believe perfection. They must smell a little truth or a little failure before they trust the lie." So the network began to send minor truths, small Allied operations that did occur. They even allowed the Germans to intercept lightly coded plans that seemed valuable but weren't. With every success, trust deepened, and with every new lie, the illusion grew stronger. The turning point. By the time 1944 dawned, Armitage's network had become a living organism. It breathed, evolved, and adapted to the enemy's suspicions. The next operation, Fortitude, would be its final and greatest test. For 3 years, they had prepared for this moment. Now the question was no longer whether the Germans would believe them, it was whether they could keep believing even when the truth was landing on the beaches of Normandy. Spring 1944. Europe was still under Hitler's grip. France was occupied, its coastline bristling with steel and concrete. Thousands of German troops manned bunkers, guns, and minefields from the beaches of Normandy to the cliffs of Calais. But somewhere in the midst of all this, an illusion was being born, one that would mislead the most paranoid dictator in history.
Inside a heavily guarded office in London, Thomas Armitage and his team studied an enormous map of northern France. Colored pins, strings, and coded notes littered its surface. Every mark, every symbol, every route was part of a lie so complex that it required hundreds of minds to sustain it. The plan was Operation Fortitude, the greatest deception ever attempted in warfare. Its goal was clear: make Hitler believe that the Allied invasion of France would strike at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. But this was not just a military trick. It was psychological warfare on a global scale. The Phantom Army. Armitage knew that the illusion couldn't rest on rumors alone. It had to be visible, tangible, believable. And so a phantom was created, an entire army that did not exist. In the fields of southeastern England, British and American engineers built decoy camps filled with inflatable tanks, wooden trucks, and aircraft made of canvas. Fake runways glistened under floodlights. Dummy landing craft lined the rivers. At night, soldiers lit campfires and moved vehicles under tarps, shadows performing for the German reconnaissance planes circling above. And to lead this fictional force, the Allies chose a man whose reputation was so powerful that his very name would anchor the illusion: General George S. Patton. Hitler considered Patton the Allies' most aggressive commander. If Patton was leading the army at Dover, then surely that army was real. It was the perfect bait. Operation Fortitude South. While Patton's Phantom Army prepared to invade Calais, the real invasion force was gathering in secrecy on the southern coast, poised for Normandy.
The deception required more than wooden tanks. It required a living, breathing chorus of voices. This was where the double-cross network came in. Every one of Armitage's double agents, Garbo, Tricycle, Tate, Brutus, Bronx, and others, was now activated with a single mission: feed the Germans the story they were meant to believe. Garbo's coded reports described entire divisions massing in Kent, shipping convoys preparing at Dover, fuel depots being built near Ramsgate. He mentioned weather updates, troop morale, even gossip among imaginary soldiers. Each message was designed to sound authentic, mundane, and consistent with every other source. It was a symphony of lies conducted with precision. Garbo's greatest trick. In Madrid, a German intelligence officer named Karl Erich Kuhlenthal considered Agent Garbo one of his most prized sources. For years, Garbo had sent him information so reliable that his reports were forwarded directly to Berlin, often landing on Hitler's own desk. By early 1944, Garbo's network had become so invaluable that the Abwehr awarded him the Iron Cross, one of Nazi Germany's highest honors. Hitler himself approved it. Garbo received the medal in secret from the very enemy he was deceiving. Armitage smiled when he heard the news. He said quietly, "Imagine that. The man fooling Hitler gets decorated by him for it." But Garbo's real test was yet to come. On the night of June 5, 1944, as thousands of Allied ships prepared to cross the English Channel toward Normandy, Garbo sent an urgent message to Berlin. Troop movements in southern England indicate an imminent operation. My sources believe the attack will begin at Normandy, perhaps as a diversion before the main strike at Calais. It was a masterstroke of deception. Garbo told the truth, then buried it inside a larger lie.
Years later, historians would piece together fragments of information, slowly revealing the impact of the operation. Analysts recognized that if the mission had not succeeded, the war might have continued for months or even years, with countless additional casualties. The precision, courage, and timing of Hartmann and his team had not just shortened the conflict, it had saved lives, preserved cities, and altered the course of history. Hartmann often reflected on the irony of it all. The world celebrated generals and battles, yet the decisive act, the
the one that could have ended the war in weeks, remained almost entirely unknown. In the quiet of his study, he would look at the maps, the photographs, and the reports, remembering the night when shadows changed history. And yet, despite the secrecy, there was satisfaction, there was pride. There was the knowledge that, in the darkest hours of war, a small group of determined individuals had stepped forward, defied impossible odds, and carried humanity closer to peace. The last mission that could have ended the war in weeks was more than a military operation. It was a testament to courage, to precision, and to the belief that one act, executed with skill and bravery, can change the fate of millions. Hartmann's story, though quiet and largely unseen, serves as a reminder. History is not only written by the armies that march and the battles that dominate headlines. Sometimes it is written by those who move in the shadows, guided by courage, conviction, and the unwavering belief that what they do can make the world better. As peace settled across the continents, Hartmann walked through cities slowly recovering from the devastation of war. The streets bore the scars of conflict, yet life was returning. Children laughed, markets thrived once more, and the sun rose over landscapes that had been shrouded in smoke and shadow. For him, every victory was tempered by memory. He remembered the sounds of the bunker, the tension in the forest, the near misses that could have ended everything. He remembered his team, their courage, their discipline, and their silent determination. Together, they had carried a mission that no one outside their circle would ever fully understand, and yet its impact had reshaped history.
By the time Berlin decoded the message, it was already morning. The invasion had begun. The Day of Days. June 6, 1944. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, the German High Command hesitated. Reports from Garbo and other agents suggested that Normandy was not the main assault, but merely a feint. The true invasion, they believed, would still come at Pas de Calais. For days, Hitler refused to release his reserve divisions. Panzer units that could have crushed the beachhead sat idle, waiting for an attack that never came. Meanwhile, the Allies poured reinforcements into Normandy, establishing a foothold that would lead to the liberation of France. Every minute of delay cost the Germans dearly. Every hesitation was another victory for the invisible army of deception. Berlin's blindness. Inside the Führer bunker, reports flooded in. Contradictions, half-truths, confusion. Some generals insisted the Normandy landings were real. Others believed Garbo's intelligence. Hitler slammed his fist on the map. "Calais," he shouted. "They will come at Calais. Normandy is only a trick." His belief never wavered. Even as Allied troops pushed deep into France, Hitler clung to the illusion his enemies had built for him, an illusion crafted by men and women he would never meet.
And yet, the Nazis still maintained defenses at Calais until September, 3 months after D-Day. 3 months of manpower and resources wasted, all because of one of the greatest deceptions in military history. The double-cross network had done what no army could have done alone. They had blinded the enemy. Armitage stood in his office that autumn, staring once again at the map of Europe. So many lives had been saved by lies. He thought of the agents who had risked everything, the ones who'd vanished without recognition. When one of his subordinates asked him how it had all worked, Armitage gave a tired smile. "Because," he said softly, "because we made them believe what they wanted to believe." Summer, 1945. The guns of Europe had finally fallen silent. From the shattered ruins of Berlin to the beaches of Normandy, the world was beginning to count its dead and its heroes. But in the smoke-filled corridors of British intelligence, there was no celebration, only silence and secrets. The war of deception, the invisible front, had not ended with the surrender of Germany. For the men and women of the double-cross network, victory came not with parades, but with erasure. Their names would be struck from records, their deeds classified for decades, their very existence denied by the governments they served. Thomas Armitage sat in his dimly lit office at MI5 headquarters, staring at a folder stamped in red, "Ex-agents, terminated or transferred." It contained the names of every double agent who had played a part in deceiving the Nazis: Garbo, Tricycle, Tate, Bronx, Brutus, Treasure.
Each one had helped weave the grand illusion that shaped the outcome of D-Day. Each one had risked death in a game where even the smallest lie could be fatal. And now, their war stories would vanish like smoke in the wind. The aftermath of lies. The intelligence war had left deep scars on both sides. In post-war Germany, captured Abwehr officers sat in interrogation rooms trying to understand how they had been deceived so completely. They spoke of their trusted agents, their coded transmissions, their elaborate verification systems. To them, it seemed impossible that every single one of their informants in Britain had been feeding them lies. One officer, Oberst Wilhelm Ritter, said bitterly during his trial, "We lost not because we lacked strength, but because we trusted ghosts." And he wasn't wrong. The British had built an empire of ghosts, agents who existed only on paper, in coded messages, and in the minds of desperate German officers clinging to scraps of hope. Even the Abwehr's own analysts were fooled. They'd built elaborate dossiers on men who had never existed, with photographs, families, and service records. It wasn't just clever intelligence work. It was psychological warfare, waged by storytellers.
Garbo's disappearance. When the war ended, Juan Pujol Garcia, Agent Garbo, vanished. To the Germans, he had died in Africa. To the British, he was declared inactive. In truth, he slipped quietly into exile. He settled in Venezuela under a new name, living in anonymity for decades. He had fooled two of the most powerful intelligence empires in history, and both had rewarded him. Britain awarded him an MBE, Member of the Order of the British Empire. Germany gave him the Iron Cross. He was perhaps the only man in history to receive honors from both sides of World War II for the same mission. Years later, when he was finally discovered by a British historian, Garbo said quietly, "I did what I had to do. I fought for peace, not for medals." He had played the role of a lifetime and walked away from the stage before the curtain fell. The price of secrecy. Not everyone was as lucky. Some agents were caught in the post-war chaos. Others disappeared in the shifting shadows of the Cold War. Ladislav Tricycle Popov,
the flamboyant Yugoslav playboy who inspired Ian Fleming's James Bond, continued working for MI6 for a time, but his usefulness waned as new alliances formed and old ones crumbled. He lived the rest of his life between Europe and the United States, forever haunted by the people he'd betrayed and the friends he'd lost.
Eddie Chapman, Agent Zigzag, was one of the few who publicly told his story. A safecracker turned double agent, he charmed and conned both the Nazis and the British. He lived freely, but never comfortably. For a man who'd lived by deception, peace felt like a prison. And then there were those who could never tell their stories. The nameless couriers, the radio operators, the women who carried messages hidden in hems and lipstick tubes. Their courage went unrecorded. Their victories buried beneath silence. The Ghost War continues. As the Cold War dawned, many of the methods and lessons of the double-cross network were quietly passed on. The Soviet Union had learned from the Abwehr's mistakes. Britain and America built new systems of counterintelligence, drawing directly from the deception playbook of Fortitude and Double-Cross. Operation Mincemeat, Operation Bodyguard, and later Cold War disinformation campaigns all owed their existence to the network that had once fooled Hitler. Thomas Armitage, now aging and retired, would sometimes receive letters, unsigned, unmarked, with words written in code only he could understand. Old comrades checking in, old ghosts reminding him they were still alive. He would pour himself a drink and sit by the window, the London rain tapping against the glass. He would think of Garbo's quiet smile, of Popov's laughter, of the faceless agents who died unknown. And he would whisper to the dark, "We did our duty. We told the biggest lie in history, and it saved the world."
The legacy of deception. Decades later, when archives were finally declassified, historians would uncover the full scale of the double-cross network. It turned out that every single German agent operating in Britain during the war had been turned or neutralized. Not one Nazi spy sent information from the United Kingdom without British oversight. The entire Abwehr network, every radio transmission, every coded message had been under Allied control. The Nazis had never realized they were being fed their own reflection. In the words of one declassified MI5 officer, "We did not just spy on the enemy. We became their eyes and then blinded them with their own vision." Epilogue: The Invisible Victory. There were no medals, no monuments, no grand speeches for the double-cross agents. Their victory existed only in footnotes, in secret files, in the quiet pride of those who had lived in the shadows. But their work changed the course of history. Without them, D-Day might have failed. Without them, Hitler might have thrown his forces at Normandy in time. Without them, the war might have dragged on for years more. The men and women of the double-cross network had proven that wars are not won only with bullets and bombs, but with imagination, patience, and the courage to lie for the truth. As the final lines of Armitage's final report read, "Our greatest weapon was not the gun nor the tank nor the plane. It was belief, carefully shaped, lovingly fed, and fatally delivered." And somewhere, in the quiet corners of history, their ghosts still linger, smiling in the shadows, knowing that their greatest victory was never known to the world.